Today on part 6 of Courtside's 10-part 2019 NFL preview, I'm taking a deep dive into the AFC North. How will the Steelers look in the post-Antonio Brown and post-Le'Veon Bell era? And will Freddie Kitchens be able to coach the Cleveland Browns to their first playoff berth since 2002? I'll talk about all that and more today, so sit back, relax, and take a seat. Courtside. Hello there and welcome to episode 31 of Courtside and part 6 of Courtside's 10-part 2019 NFL preview. I am your host, Andrew Cohen. If you have yet to do so, I highly recommend going and checking out each of the first 5 parts of the NFL preview here on Courtside. And if you're enjoying this NFL preview, I'd really appreciate it if you went ahead and subscribed to the podcast wherever you may be listening. Reminder about how this episode is going to go. I'm going to talk about every team in the AFC North division in the order that I think the standings will look like at the end of the season. For each team, I'll give you 3 storylines and or players to watch throughout the 2019 NFL season, and I'll give you my projected record for each team. And to predict each team's record, I've gone through and predicted every single game for the 2019 NFL season. Every game for every team, weeks 1 through 17. I'm not going to get every game right, but I do think I'm going to be pretty close on the majority of the records I've predicted because I've gone through and looked at every single game. And now with that out of the way, let's talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are finishing first in the AFC North in 2019. Biggest thing here with the Steelers is it's the post-Antonio Brown, post-Le'Veon Bell era, and one of the biggest problems with this team over the past few years has been they're very noisy. There's a lot of drama going on in that locker room over the past few years, whether it was Le'Veon Bell holding out multiple times, including one time for the entire season, or Antonio Brown fighting with Ben Roethlisberger or other teammates. There always seemed to be some sort of drama surrounding the Steelers. Well, now that is no more because the two guys most responsible for all the drama in Pittsburgh are gone. Antonio Brown traded to the Raiders, Le'Veon Bell signed with the Jets. They're gone. Yes, the Steelers lost a lot of talent, although Le'Veon Bell didn't play last year anyways, and they already found his replacement in James Conner, so that's not a big deal. And the Steelers are the best team in the NFL when it comes to drafting and developing young wide receivers. Look at Juju Smith-Schuster. Look at James Washington. Heck, even look at Antonio Brown, right? They drafted him 6th round. He ended up turning into one of the best receivers, if not the best receiver in the NFL. So the larger loss here is Antonio Brown, but they have guys that have already come in to potentially replace him. Now, Juju Smith-Schuster, though, is going to have to step into the role of Antonio Brown, and that's the question there. Will he actually be able to step into that role and be able to handle the defensive attention that Antonio Brown was able to take care of during his time in Pittsburgh? That remains to be seen, but make no mistake, for the first time in years, the Steelers can finally focus on football instead of dealing with any sort of the drama caused by AB and Le'Veon Bell. Second thing with this team, the front 7 is really strong. The defense as a whole is looking pretty good, but the front 7 is scary. Last year, the Steelers were only 5th in the league in interceptions with just 8, but were tied for the league lead in sacks with 52. They have guys like Pro Bowlers TJ Watt and Cameron Hayward. They have Jerron Hargrave at defensive tackle, Bud Dupree, outside linebacker, Stephon Tuitt, Vince Williams. A bunch of pass rushers, all of whom are getting sacks and are threats to get sacks week in and week out. It's going to be scary to face the Steelers pass rush this year. It is. And it's not going to be impossible to score on them, right? Their secondary is still, it has some holes, right? They didn't force a lot of turnovers last year, but it's still certainly going to be difficult to face the Steelers teams with 3 to 4 scary pass rushers rushing the quarterback on almost every single play. Storyline number 3, turnover differential. I looked at this from last year. Now, as I briefly mentioned, when talking about the defense, I mentioned that they only had 8 interceptions last season. 5th lowest total in the league. Not very good. But then on the flip side, Ben Roethlisberger threw 16 interceptions by himself. Twice as many thrown by Roethlisberger as the defense picked off the entire season. Big Ben has also thrown at least 13 picks over each of the last 4 seasons. That's not very good. Steelers were ranked as the 5th worst in turnover differential last season. 5th worst. Only 2 of the 12 playoff teams in 2018 had a turnover differential less than 0, like the Steelers did. Those teams were the Ravens and Eagles. The Ravens lost in the first round, and had Cody Parkey made his field goal for the Bears, the Eagles would have lost in the first round. So, you don't really want to be in that lower turnover differential. So if the Steelers can really clean that up this year and Big Ben cannot make as many mistakes on offense, that's how this team is going to be able to compete for a top seed, not only in their division, but in the AFC, and potentially compete to go to the Super Bowl this year. My projected record, I have them at 10-6. I think they're a good team. They're going to win a lot of games, but they're also going to have their inconsistencies, right? They turn the ball over a lot. They don't get a ton of turnovers on the other side. We have to see how Big Ben will look without Antonio Brown. Right? I mentioned Juju Smith-Schuster has to adjust to taking over that Antonio Brown role. So does Big Ben, right? He has to adjust to the fact that he doesn't have this ginormous safety net, a guy who you can throw it to in double coverage and he'll come down with it a lot more often than any other guy in the league. He has to adjust to that as well, right? He no longer has that luxury of the NFL's top receiver. We know the defense can get sacks, but can they create more turnovers? We'll have to see. Overall, the Steelers team is very strong, though. But again, I see them losing some tough games in 2019, which is why I have them at 10-6. All right, now moving on to the Cleveland Browns, maybe the NFL's most interesting team in 2019. Biggest thing I'm watching to at least start the year is Freddie Kitchens. Can he coach? I already don't get great vibes from this Browns team in terms of leadership from the coaches. You got guys like Baker Mayfield and Odell Beckham talking an awful lot for guys that, quite frankly, haven't accomplished a whole lot in terms of winning games in the NFL. Baker's talking about how this team's going to be great, and he's making comments about other quarterbacks like Daniel Jones, and Odell can't seem to stop talking about the Giants since they traded him away. You don't hear these types of things from other teams. The next closest thing is Antonio Brown, the helmet situation, but that's different because he's fighting a battle with the league, and there's not much the coaching staff can do. Whereas with Cleveland, why hasn't Freddie Kitchens or anybody in that organization taken aside Baker, taken aside Odell, and tell them to maybe stop talking to the media? Maybe start focusing on getting better at football and winning games this year? Just a thought. And keep in mind with Freddie Kitchens, one of the biggest reasons he supposedly got the job as the head coach is due to his good relationship with Baker Mayfield. You know why he has a good relationship with Baker? Because he lets him talk, right? He lets him talk whenever he wants about whatever he wants. Listen, I can talk about Baker Mayfield for a while. That's a whole nother topic. Maybe I'll talk about that in a future episode. But back to the coach. Freddie Kitchens. He was the running backs coach to begin last year. The running backs coach. He's never been a head coach or even a coordinator at any level. Not the pros, not in college. I don't believe he was in high school either. So there's no track record that says he's going to be able to coach. And especially to coach a team with as many stars and personalities and egos as this Cleveland Browns team has. I expect there to be some rough moments for Freddie Kitchens this year, both tactically and in the games, but also off the field, right? And you're kind of already seeing it with a lot of talk from Cleveland Browns camp. Storyline number 2 would be the offensive line. I think this is an overlooked part of this team, to be honest, right? They see Baker Mayfield, Odell Beckham, Jarvis Landry, Nick Chubb, and okay, they're all really good players. But what about the offensive line that's going to be protecting Baker and creating holes for Chubb in the run game? Outside of their left guard, Joel Bitonio, and their center, J.C. Trotter, the offensive line is weak. They're exceptionally weak at offensive tackle with guys like Greg Robinson and Cam Hubbard, I think it is. These are not good players at offensive tackle. They also traded away their very good right guard and Kevin Zeitler to the Giants this offseason, I believe in return for Odell Beckham or for Olivier Vernon. One of those two trades, I can't remember exactly which. I expect the Browns to give up a lot of sacks this year and to potentially, as I mentioned briefly, struggle to make holes in the running game for Nick Chubb. The O-line at times I think could really hinder this offense's potential, and that's why it's something that's going to be really key to watch this year with the Cleveland Browns. And here are 3 players. I'm going to give you 3 players for storyline number 3. Myles Garrett, Joe Schobert, and Denzel Ward. Now, if I'm building a defense in the NFL, I want 3 key ingredients. I want an elite pass rusher that's going to get after the quarterback and be a potential to get a sack on every single play. I want a field general linebacker that's going to be able to patrol the field, cover, make tackles, be a very versatile player in my defense. And I want an elite guy in the secondary, ideally at corner, that can take in a receiver, cover him, and shut him down. The Browns have all 3 of those ingredients, right? They have Myles Garrett, former 2017 first overall pick, 13.5 sacks last year, 29 quarterback hits, Pro Bowler. He's looking like a stud. Middle linebacker, you have Joe Schobert, really good in the middle of the field, right? He is that field general type of player for the Browns. Pro Bowler in 2017, followed that year up with a really nice 2018 campaign. Cornerback Denzel Ward, first round pick, 4th overall in 2018. As a rookie, he made the Pro Bowl. Very impressive. So they have all the key pieces, right? They have the 3 ingredients that I'm looking for in a defense. If everybody else, guys like Olivier Vernon, who they traded for, Sheldon Richardson, who they brought in on the defensive line, guys like Demarius Randall and Morgan Burnett at safety, if those guys can produce, this Cleveland defense could be pretty strong in 2019. Player 3. One other thing I'm looking at here. This is a bonus one. Player number 4. Nick Chubb. The Browns trade away Chubb's backup Duke Johnson to Houston, and until Kareem Hunt comes back around week 10, there really is no backup to Nick Chubb. They have Dontrell Hilliard, an undrafted rookie who they brought in last year. He's not very good. He's more of a maybe potential punt and kick returner. Maybe gets a couple of third down opportunities as a pass catching back. But now all the pressure is on Nick Chubb to perform. Right, very good last year, 5.2 yards per carry, 8 rushing touchdowns. Wasn't great. It wasn't a great receiver out of the backfield, but he had his games where he was pretty good. But he hasn't proven anything to me overall as a receiving back. I mentioned the offensive line has some question marks, especially with the departure of Kedon Zietler. Here's the thing: if Chubb struggles, the Browns' entire offense is going to struggle because they don't have anybody else they can bring in at running back that can do anything. And another key thing here, if Chubb gets injured, even if it's just he misses a quarter, he misses a half, a game or two, the Browns don't have any other reliable backs they can put in and take his place. So then what's the situation there? The offense isn't going to move because if I'm the defense, I'm just going to say, play the pass. They're not going to be able to run the football no matter who they put out there and what defense we run. Overall, I have the Browns at 9-7. I have them at 9-7. I'm getting off to a slow start, but I have them finishing the year winning each of their last 4 games. I see an adjustment period here with this team. New coach, new players. They're not as good as the Steelers. They could lose to Pittsburgh twice. Last year, Baker Mayfield only won 1 game outside of Cleveland. Just 1. They played road games against the Jets, Ravens, Patriots, Broncos, Niners, Steelers. Those are all tough teams to play on the road. Right? They're tough teams to play against in general, but especially on the road. I don't see Cleveland winning more than 1 to 2 of those games, maybe. Again, they didn't prove they could win road games last year, so why should I come into the year this year thinking that they'll be able to do that? They have to prove me wrong. But anyways, once again, I have the Cleveland Browns at 9-7, finishing second place in the AFC North in 2019. Next up here, we have the Baltimore Ravens. Key thing with this team is Lamar Jackson and the rush-heavy offense. Now, Lamar Jackson, 6-1 as the starter last year, helped the Ravens clinch the AFC North title, made it to the playoffs. When he started, they did not look like a playoff team, and he really invigorated that team and led them to the playoffs. Mainly on the strength of his legs. Here's some interesting stats about Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson had more rushing attempts than completions in 6 of his 7 regular season starts last year. He also never had more than 14 completions in a single game and only had 200 passing yards in a game once. The NFL is a passing league. You cannot win consistently over an extended period of time without the threat of a passing game. If Lamar Jackson can have more success throwing the ball this year, great. The Ravens are going to be able to put together more wins than I think they are. But John Harbaugh has already been on record as saying he expects Jackson to run even more than he did last year. That concerns me a little bit. And this year, their opponent's going to have an entire, half a season worth of tape on Jackson and the offense to look at and reference, right? So the Chargers watched the Ravens in the regular season, played them a second time in the playoffs. For about 3.5 quarters, they dominated the Ravens in that game. I'm just saying, right? There is a track record there with teams being able to stop Lamar Jackson once getting a pretty good look at him. Storyline number 2 is the defensive losses. I mean, this was one of the better defensive teams in the league last year. They lost 4 key guys. They lost C.J. Mosley, who's by far the biggest loss for them. He's one of the best middle linebackers in the league, Pro Bowler each of the last 3 seasons, and 4 of the last 5. Eric Weddle, a Pro Bowler at free safety. He was a Pro Bowler each of his 3 years in Baltimore. Really good player in the secondary there. At linebacker, they lost Terrell Suggs, who's been a staple of this Ravens defense for the last decade and a half. 15 years he's been on this team. He's gone, and he's still fairly productive even at his current age. He went to Arizona. Zadarius Smith went to the Packers this offseason. He's bringing with him 8.5 sacks from last year. They lost a lot of key guys. Now, the only main acquisition they made was Earl Thomas. They signed him to a big 4-year, $55 million contract to replace Eric Weddle at free safety. Earl Thomas has broken his leg 2 times in the last few years. I think 2 times in the last 3 years. Only played 4 games in 2018, a career low. Already going on 30 years old. Now, I think he's a better option than Weddle, who's already 34. But there are definitely question marks here with Earl Thomas. Make no mistake. Now, all the other guys, Mosley, Suggs, Zadarius Smith, they're going to be replaced in-house. They're going to be replaced by mid to late round draft picks. So the talent's not going to be there immediately. They're going to lose a lot of talent, and you're going to see it at the beginning of the year. Last year's defense allowed the fewest total yards per game, was second best in scoring defense. They were very tough to face, and that was even despite the fact that they only forced 17 turnovers, tied for the 6th fewest amount of turnovers forced in the league. They didn't make you turn the ball over, but they still stopped you. That's impressive. However, with the loss of guys like Mosley, Suggs, Zadarius Smith, Eric Weddle, this defense will take a step back in 2019, at least in my opinion. And finally, storyline number 3 is the wide receiving corps. Here's the depth chart at wide receiver for the Ravens. Willie Snead, Seth Roberts, first-round pick Marquise Brown, he's pretty good. Chris Moore and Jaleel Scott, those are your top 5 receivers in Baltimore. There's not much talent there outside of Marquise Brown. And if you want to help Lamar Jackson improve in the passing game, like I already mentioned, they're going to have to do this year, ideally he would have a lot more talent around him, at least a little bit more talent than all these guys. Like Snead, Roberts, those guys are 4th receivers on good passing offenses. Marquise Brown has a lot of potential, but is he going to develop if Lamar Jackson is only completing 14 passes per game at most? Definitely something to watch this year with the Ravens. I had them at 6-10. Now, they finished 10-6 last year, so this is a pretty steep decline. But I see both their offense and defense taking a step back. Offensively, I think teams are going to be able to stop the rush-heavy scheme, force an unproven quarterback to pass the ball to a very weak receiving corps. Defensively, they're going to need to replace a lot of talent to maintain the level they played at last year. That's going to be difficult to do with the personnel they have, quite simply. Add that to the fact they aren't as good as the Steelers. They're not as good as the Browns. They're likely going to lose at least 2 to 3 of those games against those teams. I think it's going to be a fairly disappointing season for the Ravens, finishing at 6-10. And finally, in last place in the AFC North, I have your Cincinnati Bengals. Now, they brought in a new coach this offseason. They finally fired Marvin Lewis after 16 gloriously disappointing seasons. 0 playoff wins in 7 appearances. How he managed to keep his job for 16 years is one of the 7 wonders of the world. Now, they replaced him with former Rams quarterback coach Zach Taylor. Here's the thing with head coaches in the NFL. The phrase you keep hearing is that teams are trying to find the next Sean McVay. They're trying to find the next Sean McVay. So the Bengals took that quite literally. They go out, hire one of McVay's assistants from the Rams. However, it doesn't mean that Taylor's the next Sean McVay. It doesn't mean he's even close to the next Sean McVay. Now, first of all, here's another example. Look at Bill Belichick. Right? You look at his coaching tree. Teams were looking for the next Bill Belichick. They go right to New England and they say, We'll take your best coordinator. More often than not, it doesn't pan out. Josh McDaniels only lasted 2 years with the Broncos. Matt Patricia might not even make it through 2 years in Detroit. So as you see, it doesn't even add up to any success that they were a head coach and assistant to Bill Belichick. Now, secondly, McVay had a lot of success early on with the Rams because they already had talent in place. They had guys like Todd Gurley, Jared Goff, Aaron Donald, Woods, Cooper Kupp. Now, I'm not saying that Sean McVay just came in there and all those guys were ready to break out and have amazing seasons. Like, yeah, he had to coach them up a little bit. But it was much easier with that Rams roster than with this Bengals roster. Again, everybody wants to hire the young, brilliant offensive mind as their head coach, just like Sean McVay, which is very hard to find anyways. But also, you need to have the pieces in place to have the success immediately. Zach Taylor has Andy Dalton, bangs up A.J. Green, a weak O-line, an unproven defense. So even though ultimately Zach Taylor, he might be a really good head coach, he doesn't have the pieces in place currently to succeed in his first season, even close to the level of success that Sean McVay had in his first season with the Rams. Here's another player. Here's a player to watch. Andy Dalton. Now, one thing hiring a former quarterbacks coach and Zach Taylor might actually do, hopefully, is get Andy Dalton to improve. I don't have much hope, though. It might be a hopeless cause. You don't know. But like when I think of an average quarterback, I think Andy Dalton. He's not the worst, but he doesn't do anything better than a lot of other guys. He's not exceptional at anything. Made the playoffs every year, 2011 to 2014, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014. Lost in the first round, all 4 years. Hasn't been back since. Now, I personally feel like this year is Dalton's last chance to prove himself. New head coach. Probably is going to want to turn things around pretty quickly. And I'm not sure Andy Dalton's in the plans. Now, Dalton has 2 years left on his contract. A pretty generous contract for the Bengals, or for Dalton, given to him by the Bengals, I must say. If he doesn't play very well, I see what the Bengals should do is go into the draft, try to get a quarterback in one of the first 2 rounds, I would say the first round, and have that guy maybe start behind Dalton for a little bit of time, maybe the entire season, but then by that second year, he's ready to go and he's ready to be the starter when they're in Cincinnati. Storyline number 3 is this defense, which is pretty bad. It's pretty bad. Last year in 2018, 3rd worst scoring defense. Gave up the 4th most rushing yards per game. Gave up the most passing yards per game. Gave up the most total yards per game. And additionally had the 5th fewest sacks in the league. They were horrendous, to say the least. There are really only a few guys that stand out on this defense heading into this year. Geno Atkins, defensive tackle, he's one of the best at his position in the league. Unfortunately, he just plays on a pretty bad football team. Now, they do have a young free safety in Jesse Bates. He got over 100 tackles last year. He was really impressive. Heading into his second year, he should be somebody to watch. Maybe a guy like William Jackson at corner. Heading into his 3rd season, he's young, he's pretty talented. Maybe a veteran like Carlos Dunlap stands out at defensive end. But nobody else really is going to be somebody that you're excited to watch on this Bengals defense. It should be another pretty bad year for the Bengals' weak defensive unit. Projected record for me, I got them at 4-12. I think it's going to be a struggle this year under Zach Taylor. Not because of him, but because of the pieces he's just been given. They're not beating the Steelers. They're not beating the Browns. They're not even close to the same level as those teams. They realistically probably only beat the Ravens once. They're not going to compete with some of their other opponents like the Seahawks, Jaguars, Patriots, Rams. So again, I have the Bengals rounding out the AFC North division with a record of 4-12. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this edition of Courtside. If you enjoyed, make sure to check out each of the first 5 parts of the 10-part Courtside 2019 NFL preview. You'll really enjoy it. Tomorrow, talking about the AFC South, I have the Jaguars coming out on top. I'll explain why tomorrow. As usual, subscribe to the podcast wherever you may be listening. Signing off, this is Andrew Cohen. I'll see you next time.